The morning I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. I knew my peaceful winter in Colorado was about to get complicated. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug steaming in the frigid February air, reading the letter that informed me my recently installed heated gutter system was an unauthorized aesthetic modification and needed immediate removal. My name is Xavier Brennan, and I had just moved into this townhouse community in Boulder 6 months ago. The place seemed perfect at first, nestled against the Flatirons with reasonable HOA fees and what I thought were sensible community guidelines. I worked remotely as a software engineer, which gave me plenty of time to maintain my property and even improve it. The heated gutter system had cost me nearly $4,000 to install, but after watching my elderly neighbor struggle with dangerous ice formations last winter, I figured it was a worthwhile investment in safety and property protection. The letter was signed by Brenda Patterson, HOA president, and demanded I remove the system within 14 days or face daily fines of $100. I crumpled the notice in my fist and went back inside, slamming the door harder than necessary. My townhouse was an end unit, positioned at the highest point of our row of 8 connected properties. Water drainage naturally flowed down toward the other units, something I had considered carefully when installing the heated gutters. I called the number listed on the violation notice. A woman answered on the third ring with a tone that already sounded annoyed. "Boulder Ridge HOA, this is Brenda." "Hi, this is Xavier Brennan from Unit 42. I just received a violation notice about my gutter system." "Yes, the heated gutters. They violate Section 7.3 of our aesthetic guidelines. All exterior modifications must maintain visual uniformity with surrounding units." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. I submitted a modification request form 2 months before installation. "I never received a denial. We have no record of that submission," Brenda said flatly. "And regardless, heated gutters create an uneven appearance. Some units have them, some do not. It disrupts the cohesive look we maintain here at Boulder Ridge." "They're barely visible from the street," I argued, "and they prevent ice dams which can cause serious structural damage and safety hazards." "Mr. Brennan, the rules exist for a reason. Remove the system within 14 days or face the consequences. Have a nice day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, feeling heat rise up my neck despite the cold outside. I had copies of everything: the original modification request, the certified mail receipt, even photos showing how minimally visible the system was. But something told me Brenda Patterson was not interested in evidence or reason. Over the next few days, I did my research. I pulled out my closing documents and reviewed every page of the HOA bylaws. Section 7.3 did mention aesthetic modifications, but it also included language about safety improvements being evaluated on a case-by-case basis. More importantly, the bylaws stated that any modification request not responded to within 30 days was considered automatically approved. I had submitted my request 63 days before installation began. I had the postal records to prove it. Armed with this information, I attended the next HOA board meeting on a cold Tuesday evening. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the main entrance that also housed a gym and a rarely used party room. About 15 residents were scattered across folding chairs, most of them looking bored or checking their phones. Brenda Patterson sat at a table in front with 2 other board members, a man named Richard Hollies who served as treasurer, and a younger woman named Patricia Simmons who was the secretary. Brenda was exactly what I expected. Mid-50s, highlighted blonde hair cut in that specific suburban style that screamed entitlement, and a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a turtleneck despite the overheated room, and kept a leather portfolio open in front of her like a shield. "Next order of business," Brenda announced, barely glancing at her agenda. "Violation notices. We had 3 this month. Mr. Chen in Unit 18 left his garbage cans visible past 7 p.m. on a non-collection day. Mrs. Rodriguez in Unit 31 has an unauthorized wreath on her door exceeding the permitted diameter, and Mr. Brennan in Unit 42 has installed a heated gutter system without approval." I raised my hand. "I would like to address that." Brenda looked up with apparent surprise, though I suspected she had known I was there all along. "Mr. Brennan, violation disputes are handled through written appeals, not during board meetings. The bylaws allow residents to speak during open forum," I said, standing up and walking to the front. I had printed copies of every relevant document, and I distributed them to the 3 board members. "I submitted my modification request on September 14th of last year. According to Section 12.2 of the bylaws, requests not responded to within 30 days are considered approved. I began installation on November 20th, 67 days after submission." Brenda barely looked at the papers. "We have no record of receiving your request." "I have the certified mail receipt showing it was delivered on September 15th and signed for by someone with the initials BP." I placed another sheet on the table, highlighting the signature line. "Your initials, I believe," a few residents murmured. Richard, the treasurer, actually picked up the document and examined it. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Brenda, this does appear to be legitimate. Anyone can forge a receipt," Brenda said dismissively. "And regardless, the aesthetic committee would never have approved such a modification. The automatic approval clause only applies to minor changes like paint colors within the approved palette or garden additions. Major structural modifications require explicit written approval." "Heated gutters are not structural," I countered. "They're an accessory system, and the bylaws make no distinction about the type of modification for the automatic approval clause. It says any request." Brenda stood up, her face flushing. "Mr. Brennan, you are disrupting this meeting with frivolous arguments. The board has made its decision. Remove the system or face fines. We are moving on." "Then I will be contacting a lawyer," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. "Because you are in violation of your own bylaws, and I have documented proof." "Do what you need to do," Brenda snapped. "Meeting adjourned." She gathered her papers and walked out of the clubhouse, leaving Richard and Patricia looking uncomfortable. Several residents approached me afterward, offering quiet words of support. One older man, who introduced himself as Frank Martinez from Unit 27, shook my hand firmly. "She pulled the same garbage with me last year over a satellite dish," Frank said. "Cost me $3,000 in lawyer fees before she finally backed down. Woman is a tyrant." "Why does everyone let her get away with it?" I asked. Frank shrugged. "Most people do not want the hassle. They pay the fines or remove whatever is bothering her. She's been board president for 6 years, runs unopposed because nobody else wants to deal with it." I left the meeting frustrated but determined. That night, I contacted 3 different lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes. The first 2 wanted retainers of $5,000 just to start. The third, a woman named Sarah Chen who had just opened her own practice, offered to review my case for a flat fee of $500. I sent her all my documentation. She called me back 2 days later. You have a strong case, Sarah said. The automatic approval clause is clear, and your documentation is solid. I can send them a cease and desist letter outlining the legal basis for your position. That might be enough to make them back off. And if it is not, then we file a complaint and potentially sue for harassment and violation of your property rights. But that gets expensive quickly. HOA litigation can drag on for months or even years. I thought about my budget. I had savings, but burning through them on a legal battle with my own HOA was not how I had planned to spend my money. Let's start with the cease and desist letter. Sarah drafted a detailed letter citing specific bylaw sections and case law from Colorado HOA disputes. She sent it via certified mail to Brenda, Richard, and Patricia, as well as to the HOA's registered agent. The letter gave them 10 days to withdraw the violation notice and confirm in writing that my heated gutter system was in compliance with community rules. Those 10 days passed without any response. On day 11, I received another notice, this time informing me that daily fines of $100 had begun accruing. I was now purportedly in debt to the HOA for $1,100. I forwarded the notice to Sarah. She sounded annoyed on the phone. They're gambling that you will give up rather than pursue litigation. It is a common tactic with aggressive HOA boards. So what do? We can file a complaint with the Colorado HOA Dispute Resolution Program. It is a mediation service that is required before you can sue. The downside is it takes time, usually 2 to 3 months to get a hearing. I felt trapped. Keep the system and rack up fines or remove it and admit defeat. Neither option was acceptable. As I sat at my kitchen table that evening, staring out at the snow-covered roofs of the townhouses below mine, an idea began forming. If they wanted me to remove the heated gutters, fine. I would remove them. But I would not do a single thing beyond that to manage the ice and snow on my roof. Not one thing. Let nature take its course and see how they like the consequences. The next morning, I called the company that had installed my heated gutter system. The owner, a guy named Tom Kowalski, sounded surprised to hear from me. You want me to remove the system we just installed 4 months ago? HOA dispute, I explained. They're fining me daily. I need it gone. Tom sighed. Man, I hate HOAs. They have no idea how important these systems are in Colorado winters. You are going to get massive ice dams without them, especially on an end unit at your elevation. I know, I said. That is kind of the point. There was a pause. Tom chuckled. I see. Well, I cannot offer you any refund since the system is installed and functioning. But I will remove it for just the labor cost. $500. Deal. Tom and his crew came out 3 days later. It took them most of the afternoon to carefully remove the heating cables, control units, and associated hardware. When they were done, my gutters looked exactly like everyone else's, plain aluminum channels with downspouts directing water toward the lower units. You sure about this? Tom asked as he loaded the last pieces into his truck. We're supposed to get a major storm system this weekend. Could dump 2 feet of snow. I am sure, I said. I took extensive photos and videos of the removal process, documenting that the system was completely gone. Then I sent a certified letter to the HOA confirming compliance with their demand and requesting immediate cessation of all fines. I also filed the complaint with the Colorado HOA Dispute Resolution Program, requesting mediation and reimbursement for my costs plus damages for harassment. Then I waited. The storm hit that Saturday, just as predicted. Snow began falling Friday night and did not stop until Sunday afternoon. I watched from my window as the accumulation climbed higher and higher. 2 feet became 2.5. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and the snow on my roof began creating exactly what Tom had warned about: ice dams. For those who do not know, ice dams form when heat from inside a house warms the roof, melting the bottom layer of snow. That water runs down toward the gutters, but the edge of the roof is colder because it extends past the heated interior. The water refreezes, creating a dam. More water backs up behind it, getting trapped under the shingles, and eventually it finds its way inside through any available opening. My townhouse, being the highest in the row with proper insulation and no heated gutters, created a spectacular ice dam. Thick ridges of ice formed along the entire edge of my roof, and the water backed up behind them started looking for somewhere to go. Because of how the townhouses were connected and graded, that somewhere was directly into the drainage system that flowed toward units 41, 40, 39, and beyond. Water that should have been managed by my heated gutters instead poured down the shared wall spaces, overwhelmed the lower unit's gutters, and began finding every crack and crevice. By Monday morning, my doorbell rang. It was my next-door neighbor from Unit 41, a young couple named Drew and Hannah Walsh. Hannah looked distraught. "Xavier, we have water coming through our ceiling," she said. "Our bedroom is flooded. Did you notice any issues with your roof?" I stepped outside and made a show of looking up at the massive ice formations hanging from my gutters. "Oh wow, yeah, that is pretty bad. I used to have heated gutters that prevented this, but the HOA made me remove them." Drew's face darkened. "They made you remove them? When?" "Last week. I have been fighting with Brenda about it for a month. She threatened daily fines until I complied." "Are you kidding me?" Drew pulled out his phone and took pictures of my roof. "This is insane. The water is destroying our bedroom. We have a newborn sleeping in there." "I am really sorry," I said, and I meant it. I had not wanted innocent neighbors to suffer. "You should document everything and contact the HOA. This is their fault for forcing me to remove a safety system." By Tuesday, 3 more units had water damage. The ice dam had grown so large that it affected everyone down the slope from my unit. Brenda received frantic calls and emails. I know this because several neighbors forwarded me the increasingly angry message chain that developed. Wednesday morning, I received a call from Richard, the HOA treasurer. He sounded tired. "Mr. Brennan, we need to discuss the water damage situation." "What about it?" I asked innocently. "Several residents are claiming the ice buildup from your unit is causing flooding in their homes. We need you to address this immediately." "Address it how?" "You made me remove my heated gutter system, which was specifically designed to prevent ice dams. You need to clear the ice and snow from your roof." "I am not required to do that by any HOA bylaw," I said. I reviewed all of them very carefully. There is no snow removal requirement for individual unit owners. In fact, Section 9.4 specifically states that roof maintenance is the responsibility of the HOA for the shared structure. Richard was silent for a moment. "Mr. Brennan, are you seriously going to let your neighbors suffer over a dispute about gutters?" "I am not letting anyone suffer. I wanted to keep my heated gutters specifically to prevent this situation. Your board president forced me to create this exact problem. Now you are dealing with the consequences. This is going to cost thousands in damages. Then you should have thought about that before violating your own bylaws and forcing me to remove a safety system." Richard hung up. That afternoon, I received an email from Brenda demanding I hire a company to remove the snow and ice from my roof within 24 hours or face emergency fines of $500 per day. I forwarded the email to Sarah, my lawyer. She called me back within an hour, laughing. "This is amazing," she said. "They are panicking, and she has no legal basis for that demand. You are right, there is no snow removal requirement in the bylaws. She is just making up rules now." "So what do I do?" "Nothing. Let her dig her hole deeper. The more erratic she gets, the stronger your case becomes." But I did feel bad about the neighbors. That evening I knocked on doors and spoke personally with Drew and Hannah, Frank Martinez, and the other affected residents. I showed them copies of all my documentation, the original modification request, the certified mail receipts, the cease and desist letter, everything. "I did not want this to happen," I told them. "I tried to prevent it, but Brenda would not listen." Drew was furious when he saw the timeline. "She ignored your request on purpose. She signed for it and just never processed it." "That is what I believe, yes." "We need to do something about this," Hannah said. "Our insurance does not cover flooding from ice dams. We are looking at $10,000 in repairs at least." Frank nodded. "She has gone too far this time. We need to call an emergency HOA meeting and vote her out." According to the bylaws, any resident could call for an emergency meeting if they gathered signatures from 20% of homeowners. Our community had 64 units, so we needed 13 signatures. By Thursday evening, we had 27. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Saturday at 2 p.m. Brenda tried to cancel it, claiming it was not properly noticed according to procedure, but Richard overruled her. He had seen the damage reports and the repair estimates. The HOA's insurance would cover some of it, but the deductibles and potential premium increases were substantial. More importantly, several residents were threatening to sue both the HOA and Brenda personally. Saturday arrived with temperatures finally warming above freezing. The ice dams began slowly melting, which actually made the flooding worse as water found new paths into the buildings. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that 2 more units had reported water damage, bringing the total to 6 out of 8 in my row. The clubhouse was packed for the meeting. Every chair was filled and people stood along the walls. Brenda sat at the front table looking defensive, her arms crossed tightly. Richard and Patricia flanked her, both looking uncomfortable. Frank Martinez stood up first. "I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Brenda Patterson as HOA president. Her actions have directly resulted in significant property damage and financial harm to multiple residents." "You cannot do that," Brenda snapped. "Board elections are held annually in May according to the bylaws. Section 15.7 allows for removal of board members for cause with a 2/3 vote of residents," Frank countered. He had clearly done his homework. "I am asserting cause based on negligent enforcement of aesthetic rules that created a safety hazard and financial liability." Richard cleared his throat. "He is correct about the bylaw. We need to allow discussion, and then hold a vote if a motion is properly made and seconded." "I second the motion," Drew Walsh said immediately, standing with his wife Hannah. "Our daughter is 2 months old. She was sleeping in a bedroom with water pouring through the ceiling because Brenda forced our neighbor to remove a safety system that would have prevented this." The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Several people were shouting. Brenda banged a gavel, demanding order. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Brennan installed an unauthorized modification that violated our aesthetic standards. I enforce the rules as written." "You ignored his modification request," I said, standing up. I had remained quiet until now, but this was the moment. "I submitted it properly. You signed for it, and you deliberately sat on it to run out the clock. Then you ignored the automatic approval clause and threatened me with fines until I removed a system that was protecting the entire row of townhouses." "That is your version of events," Brenda shot back. You have no proof I ever received that request. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector system used for presentations at meetings. On the screen appeared the certified mail receipt, signature clearly visible. Then I showed the emails, the photos, the timeline of events, everything. "This is your signature, is it not?" I asked. "These are the certified mail tracking numbers. The post office confirms delivery on September 15th at 2:47 p.m. You signed for a certified letter addressed to the HOA Modification Request Committee on that exact date. There were no other certified letters delivered to the HOA that day. It was my request." Brenda's face went pale, then red. "You are twisting this around. The system still violated aesthetic standards." "Show me where in the bylaws heated gutters are specifically prohibited for aesthetic reasons," I challenged. She opened her portfolio and flipped through pages, searching. She could not find it because it did not exist. Richard spoke up. "Brenda, I think you need to be honest here. Did you receive his request or not?" "I received dozens of requests," she said defensively. "I cannot possibly remember every single one." "But you signed for this one personally," Richard pressed. "Not the management company, not Patricia, you." "I want a vote," Frank said loudly. "All in favor of removing Brenda Patterson as HOA president and board member for cause, raise your hand." The vote was not even close. 43 people raised their hands. Only 2 voted against removal, one of them being Brenda herself. Patricia abstained. Richard voted in favor. "Motion passes," Richard said quietly. "Brenda, you are removed from the board effective immediately. Please surrender all HOA documents and property." Brenda stood up, shaking with rage. "You are all going to regret this. I will sue every single one of you for defamation and wrongful removal. I have given 6 years to this community, and this is how you treat me. You treated us like subjects instead of neighbors," Frank said. "Good riddance." Brenda stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room sat in silence for a moment before people began talking again. Richard called for nominations for an interim president. Frank was nominated and elected unanimously. One of his first acts was to issue an official statement that my heated gutter system had been approved as of the original submission date, and that all fines assessed against me were voided. He also announced that the HOA would reimburse me for my legal fees and the cost of removing and reinstalling the system. "Furthermore," Frank said, reading from notes he had prepared, "I am proposing the board authorize installation of heated gutter systems on all end units and any other units where residents want them, at resident expense but with HOA approval guaranteed. These systems are proven safety devices, and we should be encouraging them, not banning them." That motion also passed overwhelmingly. Over the next week, things settled into a new normal. Tom came back out and reinstalled my heated gutter system at cost, just labor charges. The HOA reimbursed me $3,200 for the original installation, removal, and reinstallation, plus another $2,000 for my legal fees. The residents with water damage filed claims with the HOA's insurance. The insurance company, after investigating, determined that Brenda's actions constituted negligent enforcement that directly caused the damage. They paid out the claims, but then sued Brenda personally for the loss, claiming her individual negligence made her liable rather than the HOA as an organization. I learned this from Richard, who had remained on the board as treasurer under Frank's presidency. He stopped by my place one evening with a bottle of good bourbon. "Thought you might want an update on the legal situation," he said as we sat in my living room. "I heard insurance was going after Brenda." "They are. Their lawyers did a deep investigation, and found she has a history of similar behavior. Remember Frank mentioning his satellite dish dispute? Turns out she pulled the same stunt, ignored his modification request, and then claimed it was never submitted. He eventually gave up and paid the fines rather than fight it. The insurance company is arguing this establishes a pattern of willful misconduct. Will they actually get anything from her? Richard shrugged. Her homeowner's insurance might cover some of it, but policies usually have exclusions for intentional acts. She could be personally on the hook for $60,000–$70,000 once you add up all the damage, legal fees, and the insurance company's costs. That is a lot of money. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, Richard said, sipping his bourbon. She brought this entirely on herself. What I did not know at the time was that the insurance investigation had uncovered something else. One of the attorneys working the case decided to do a full audit of HOA finances, standard procedure when individual board member conduct was at issue. What they found was troubling. Frank called another meeting 2 weeks later. This one had a different energy, tense and serious. A lawyer I did not recognize sat at the front table next to Frank and Richard. "Thank you all for coming," Frank began. "We have a serious matter to discuss. During the insurance investigation into the water damage incident, some financial irregularities were discovered. I am going to let attorney Matthew Green explain." The lawyer stood up. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair and a professional demeanor. "My firm was retained to review HOA finances as part of the insurance investigation. We found evidence that approximately $43,000 in HOA funds are unaccounted for over the past 3 years. The money appears to have been taken through various methods, including fake vendor invoices, duplicate payments, and unauthorized reimbursements." The room went silent. Someone whispered, "Are you saying Brenda stole money?" "We have documented evidence that the former president approved payments to several vendors who do not appear to exist. We also found that she submitted numerous reimbursement requests for expenses that were either inflated or entirely fabricated. For example, she claimed $1,200 for cleaning supplies that were never delivered. She billed the HOA for legal consultations that never occurred. The pattern is extensive and clear." "Have you contacted the police?" someone asked. "That is why I am here tonight," Matthew said. "Before involving law enforcement, we wanted to inform the community and give you the opportunity to understand what comes next. If you vote to pursue criminal charges, this becomes a police matter. Brenda could face felony theft charges." Drew stood up. "She absolutely stole that money. Why would we not press charges?" "Some HOAs prefer to handle these matters civilly," Matthew explained. "They demand repayment and avoid the publicity and hassle of a criminal trial. I am not recommending one approach over the other, just explaining the options." Frank put it to a vote. Should the HOA cooperate with law enforcement and pursue criminal charges against Brenda Patterson for theft of HOA funds? The vote was unanimous. Every single person voted yes. Matthew nodded. "I will contact the Boulder Police Department tomorrow morning and provide them with all our findings." 2 detectives arrived at the next board meeting a week later. They asked questions, reviewed documents, and took copies of everything Matthew's firm had compiled. One of them, a woman named Detective Sarah Wilson, spoke to the group. "Based on what we have seen so far, this appears to be a clear case of embezzlement and theft. The amount exceeds the felony threshold in Colorado. We will be opening a formal investigation and will likely issue a warrant for Miss Patterson's arrest within the next few days." It actually happened faster than that. The next afternoon, I was working from home when I heard sirens. I looked out my window and saw 2 police cars pulled up in front of Brenda's unit, 3 doors down from mine. Officers went inside and emerged 10 minutes later with Brenda in handcuffs. She was screaming something I could not make out, her face red and twisted with anger. Several neighbors came out to watch. Someone recorded it on their phone. I stayed inside, watching through my window. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that she was finally facing consequences for her actions, but sadness that it had come to this. She had done this to herself through years of petty tyranny and escalating misconduct, but it was still disturbing to watch someone's life implode. The criminal case moved through the system over the following months. Brenda was charged with 3 counts of felony theft, 1 count of forgery, and 2 counts of filing false documents. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney's office was not feeling generous. The evidence was overwhelming, and Brenda had shown zero remorse. The trial was held in Boulder County District Court that summer. I attended some of the proceedings, as did several other residents. The prosecution laid out a clear timeline of misconduct stretching back 4 years. Brenda had systematically stolen from the HOA she was supposed to be managing. The defense tried to argue that she had poor record-keeping and made honest mistakes, but the jury did not buy it. She was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison with possibility of parole after 2, plus full restitution of the stolen funds and all legal costs. The judge's comments during sentencing stuck with me. "Miss Patterson, you were entrusted with a position of responsibility in your community. Rather than serving your neighbors, you abused that trust for personal gain. You stole from the very people who had faith in you. Your conduct displays a shocking lack of integrity. Beyond the theft itself, your pattern of harassment and rule manipulation created hazardous conditions that resulted in significant property damage and distress for multiple families. This sentence reflects both the financial crimes and the broader abuse of your authority." Brenda cried as she was led away. Her husband, who had filed for divorce midway through the trial, sat in the back of the courtroom looking shell-shocked. I felt bad for him. He seemed to have had no idea what his wife was doing. Life at Boulder Ridge slowly returned to normal after that. Frank proved to be an excellent HOA president, reasonable, and focused on actual community needs rather than petty rule enforcement. The board revised several of the more ridiculous bylaws, including the aesthetic modification rules that had started this whole mess. The new rules were simple. Any safety-related modification was presumptively approved unless it created a documented hazard. Aesthetic modifications needed approval, but the standards were clarified, and the automatic approval timeline was reduced to 15 days with explicit requirements for how denials must be documented. 3 other residents installed heated gutter systems that winter. We made it through the season without a single ice dam problem. The row of townhouses that had flooded the previous year stayed dry and warm. I ran into Drew and Hannah at the community mailboxes one afternoon in December. Their daughter was bundled up in a stroller, sleeping peacefully. Hannah smiled when she saw me. "Xavier, I never properly thanked you for what you did. I know it was not fun having the whole neighborhood angry about the flooding, even though it was not your fault." "I am just glad it worked out," I said. "How is your daughter doing?" "Perfect. And our bedroom is finally finished being repaired. Insurance covered most of it, and the HOA actually kicked in the deductible as a goodwill gesture." "Frank is doing a good job," I said. "Better than Brenda," Drew agreed. "That woman was poison. I cannot believe she was stealing from us the whole time on top of everything else." We chatted for a few more minutes before going our separate ways. Walking back to my unit, I looked up at the heated cables running along my gutters, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. They hummed softly, doing their job of keeping ice at bay. The whole experience had taught me something important about community living. HOAs could be a force for good when run by reasonable people who genuinely cared about the neighborhood. But they could also become platforms for petty tyrants who let a small amount of power go to their heads. The key was not avoiding HOAs altogether. It was staying engaged, knowing your rights, and being willing to fight back when those rights were violated. I had gotten lucky in a way. My situation had resolved relatively quickly, and I had the documentation to prove my case. Many people were not so fortunate. They got ground down by endless fines and legal fees until they just gave up. Brenda had counted on that happening with me. She had assumed I would fold rather than fight. She had been wrong. The following spring, Frank announced he was stepping down as HOA president. He had only intended to serve as interim president, and he felt the community was stable enough to elect someone for a full term. Nominations were opened at the May meeting. Several people nominated me. I was surprised and tried to decline, but they persisted. Drew gave a speech about how I had stood up to Brenda when others were too intimidated, and how the community needed people who would prioritize residents over rules. I reluctantly agreed to run. There were two other candidates, both reasonable people. We each gave short speeches about our vision for the community. I kept mine simple: transparent finances, common sense rules, and focus on maintaining property values while respecting individual rights. I won with 58% of the vote. My first act as HOA president was to establish a modification request committee with clear timelines and appeal procedures. No single person could ignore or deny a request without documented reasoning. Every request would be reviewed by at least 3 people, and any denial would automatically trigger a review by the full board. We also implemented quarterly financial audits by an independent accounting firm. The cost was minimal, a few $100s every 3 months, but it provided transparency and accountability that had been sorely lacking under Brenda's reign. I served as president for 2 years. It was more work than I had anticipated, but also more rewarding. I helped mediate disputes, organized community events, and worked with the board to make thoughtful improvements to the common areas. We repaved the parking lots, updated the playground equipment, and even installed solar panels on the clubhouse roof that reduced our common utility expenses. The best part was the sense of actual community that developed. Under Brenda, people had been afraid to interact too much because you never knew when you might be violating some obscure rule. Under the new leadership, neighbors started having backyard barbecues, kids played together in the common areas, and people looked out for each other. One summer evening during my second year as president, I was doing routine inspections of common areas when Richard walked up. He had stayed on as treasurer and had been an invaluable resource. "Xavier, got a minute?" "Sure, what is up?" "I just wanted to say thank you. When all that business with Brenda started, I knew she was being unreasonable, but I did not have the courage to stand up to her. You did, and it changed this whole community for the better." "I appreciate that, Richard, but honestly, I was just protecting my own property rights. I did not set out to be some kind of hero." "That is exactly what makes you a good leader," he said. "You were not looking for power. You just wanted to be left alone to live your life. When someone tried to take that from you, you fought back. That is the kind of person who should be making decisions for a community." I thought about his words as I finished my inspection rounds. He was right in a way, but also wrong. I had not wanted to fight. I would have been perfectly happy to install my heated gutters and go on with my life, working from home and enjoying the Colorado weather. Brenda had forced the conflict by being unreasonable and then doubling down when challenged. The real lesson was about institutional resistance to accountability. Brenda had gotten away with her behavior for years because most people did not want the hassle of fighting back. She counted on that passivity, used it as a weapon to consolidate her control. It had only taken one person refusing to back down to expose the whole rotten structure. I received updates on Brenda periodically through the neighborhood grapevine. She served 18 months before being released on parole. Her divorce had been finalized, and she moved out of state immediately upon release, somewhere in Arizona according to rumor. She was ordered to continue making restitution payments for years. The insurance lawsuit was settled for $35,000, which her homeowner's insurance covered except for a $10,000 deductible she had to pay personally. Combined with the criminal restitution, her lawyer fees, and the divorce settlement, the whole ordeal probably cost her close to $100,000 plus prison time. As I entered my third year at Boulder Ridge, I decided not to run for re-election as president. I had enjoyed the role, but I wanted my evenings back for my own projects. A woman named Lisa Torres ran unopposed and won easily. She had been on the modifications committee and shared the same philosophy of reasonable governance. My heated gutter system continued to perform flawlessly through each winter. Other residents installed them, until eventually almost all the end units and several middle units had them. Ice dams became a non-issue in our community, a problem of the past. I still think about that morning when I found the orange violation notice on my door. In that moment, I had a choice: comply and accept the loss, or fight back and face the consequences. I chose to fight, but I also chose to do it strategically. I documented everything, followed proper procedures, and let Brenda dig her own grave through her increasingly erratic responses. The malicious compliance aspect had been satisfying in a petty way. Removing the gutters and letting ice dams flood the neighboring units was not nice, but it was effective. It forced the community to confront the consequences of Brenda's policies in a way that abstract arguments never could. Sometimes people need to feel the impact of bad rules before they will agree to change them. But the real victory was not about gutters or ice dams. It was about establishing a community where residents had actual rights and could hold leadership accountable. It was about proving that HOA boards were not kingdoms where presidents could rule by whim. They were organizations bound by bylaws and basic fairness, and when they violated those principles, they could be challenged and changed. I learned that standing up to institutional bullies required documentation, patience, and willingness to let things get worse before they got better. If I had removed my gutters immediately and not let the flooding happen, the community might never have rallied against Brenda. The water damage was unfortunate, but it was also the catalyst that exposed her incompetence and led to the financial investigation that revealed her crimes. One fall afternoon, 3 years after the whole mess began, I sat on my back patio watching the leaves change colors on the trees that lined our property. Tom Kowalski, the gutter guy, stopped by to do annual maintenance on my heating system. We had become friends over the years. "System looks great," he said after finishing his inspection. "Should be good for another winter. You know, I have installed probably 50 heated gutter systems since that whole thing with your HOA went public." Local news covered the story, and I got calls from all over Boulder County asking about preventing ice dams. "That is great for business," I said. "It is, but more importantly, people are safer. These systems save roofs, prevent injuries from falling ice, and stop exactly what happened here. You did a good thing, Xavier, even if it was not fun at the time. After Tom left, I went inside and pulled out the box where I kept all the documentation from the dispute. The original violation notice, the certified mail receipts, the lawyer letters, photos of the ice dams and flooding, meeting minutes, financial audit reports, and finally the newspaper clipping about Brenda's conviction. I had thought about throwing it all away multiple times, but something made me keep it. Maybe it was a reminder of what I had been through. Maybe it was evidence for some future dispute, insurance against history repeating itself. Or maybe it was just a story worth preserving, a lesson about standing up for yourself even when it was difficult. I put the box back in the closet and returned to work. I had a software project deadline approaching, and unlike HOA drama, code did not write itself. Life had returned to its comfortable routine. Work, exercise, occasional social events, and peaceful evenings in a home I actually owned and could modify as I saw fit. That winter brought another major snowstorm, nearly 3 feet in 24 hours. The heated gutters hummed steadily, melting snow and ice as quickly as it formed. Water flowed cleanly through the system into the drainage areas. No ice dams, no flooding, no frantic calls from neighbors. I stood at my window watching the snow fall, warm and dry inside my townhouse, and felt a quiet satisfaction. This was what I had fought for, not glory or revenge, but simply the right to protect my home in the most effective way possible. The fact that it had led to exposing corruption and improving the community was bonus. But at its core, this had always been about a homeowner wanting to install gutters that worked. Sometimes the simplest things become the biggest battles, not because the thing itself matters so much, but because of what it represents. My heated gutters represented whether I had agency over my own property, or whether I was subject to the arbitrary whims of someone who enjoyed wielding petty power. When Brenda forced that choice, I decided I would rather fight than submit. It had cost me time, money, stress, and conflict with neighbors who got caught in the crossfire. But in the end, it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone in Boulder Ridge who now lived in a community governed by reason rather than tyranny. The snow continued falling, and my gutters continued working, and inside my home, everything was exactly as it should be.